And we continue with our type. Look at that screen. Looks pretty sweet, doesn't it? Well, wait until you see it play. Look at that. That's very cool. So we're going to move on to a little more work with animating type. I'm just going to keep this one focused on text that follows a path. And in this example, you can see that type has been wrapped around in a circle. It's been applied to an ellipse around this little logo that I made. Don't judge me, that thing was done in like a matter of minutes, just threw it together for the sake of this exercise. However, maybe someone would buy it. I'll sell it to you for $350. So here we have just a very casual animation going on. When you're dealing with typography and you want to maintain some integrity for the wording that you're working with, don't go crazy. So I have over 5 seconds time. This text just kind of slowly rotates around this thing. If it was spinning really fast, no one would read it. No one would want to read it. They'd want to just look away and move on to something else. So you got to keep that in mind when you do text animation. Okay. You have a comp that is called number 2, type on a path. And what you're going to see is something very different than this. You're going to see no text. I'll just turn you off. And I'll shy you. I'm going to unshy the text that we should be starting with. And whoop, there we go. So here is what you're looking at in your exercise. You see the Great Montana Wilderness Society as just text on a straight line. And what we need to do is we need to learn how to apply text to a path. And a path can be anything created with one of the shape layer tools. So it could be a shape, a circle, a square, a rounded rectangle, could be a star. Then you can also create custom paths with your pen tool. So any of those vector drawing tools are good to go. The trick here is that you need to apply the path as if it were a mask. So the text layer needs to be selected. So I have it selected. I'm going to go grab my ellipse tool and I'm going to make a circle. And I'm just going to start dragging. And remember that I want a perfect circle. I hold down Shift. Okay. And once I sort of realize that I'm not in the zone of where I want my circle to be, while still holding down Shift with one finger, I'm going to extend my hand over to my space bar and I'm going to be able to relocate that circle and continue to guesstimate what position is going to be good. I'm going to go a little bit wide outside of that logo, and then I'll just let go. Maybe I'll nudge it with my arrow keys a little bit and just land it perfectly in the center. So now the text is masked. You only see what is inside of that circle that we just drew. And you can see that in the layer it came up as mask 1. So this text has a text attribute. And if I kick that text attribute open, there's something here called source text. We're not worrying about that. But then the next option down is path options. And if you open that up, you'll see that there's a field for path with a pull down menu. And the only thing that we can choose is mask 1. There's just one mask applied to that layer, and that's the only one that's available. We choose mask 1, and then we see the change on the screen. And what it does by default is that it puts the text inside the circle, which is not what we're looking for. So I'm just going to cruise through some of these options here. Reverse path is set to off, and if I choose reverse path to on, then we see that it is outside of the circle now and it's oriented in a way in which we can read it a little bit better. There is perpendicular to path, which is obviously helpful here, but if you turn it off, you see that the text will orient each letter to a vertical position. You can force alignment so that it squeezes it and doesn't have overlap or gaps. That's sometimes helpful. Here we're going to mess with some of the character attributes instead of that. So our first margin and left margin, that's where we get into the animation. So I won't go there just quite yet. I do see that society and great are kind of crushed together there. I need to get my move tool, make sure I'm not drawing any more masks on anything. So if I go to my character palette, I could do a couple things. I could change the font size, and I'm going to grab it and start dragging it. While I'm dragging it, I'm holding down the command key. And you can see that it's varying in points, not full integers. So I'm at 51.456. You can get a more refined change in any value, position, whatever, if you hold down the command key while you drag left or right. It's a good trick. You should check it out. So there, that looks pretty good. I just lowered my font size, and that just because it gets smaller, it doesn't crowd the space along that path as much. You could also play with your tracking and open it up, squeeze it together more, or whatever. I'll just hit undo because I liked where I was. Now my text looks decent. You could change the color or whatever. I just left it this this sort of stone color. But if we want animation here, we're going to use this attribute known as margin. So margin, if you just start dragging it left or right, you'll see that it's changing the location of the text on that path. So if you wanted to animate something around a circle, I would click the stopwatch for first margin at 0 frames, and then set it to go to, I don't know how far you want it to go, over 5 seconds, but maybe that's it. And look at the little RAM preview, and we've got this nice gentle movement. We're bringing this logo to life, and a lot of times that's just enough to make that design and experience a little richer. And if you were to also notice, I have some animation going on in the logo. The little stroked dash along there is rotating in a counterclockwise way, and if it interests you, how did Greg build that logo? I suggest you go in and look at it. Just unlock that layer, double click on it, and here is the logo. And you can just start digging around, open those layers up, and see how I did it. There's a few tricks in there and some things you should learn, but I'm not going to go over them right now. So back on type on a path, I'll just lock that logo. So here is a very subtle orientation of text on a circle. Now let's get a little more complicated. Let's look at composition number 3. Composition number 3, I'm trying to be poetic here, and gosh, I look at this thing and I feel a little embarrassed because it's pretty ugly. But you're going to get the idea. Going with sort of a poem, a visual poem theory, a visual poem, and I have the blade of grass blowing in the wind. And there's my lovely little poem. This is something that my 9-year-old would make. But I'm just trying to help you get a grasp of not only some technical applications, but how you could start to experiment with text in some creative ways. I am suggesting wind, all with words. So that's our goal. If we have a look at how to do this, I'm just going to delete those layers and have a good starting point like what you guys have in your comp. So here we have blowing in the wind and a blade of grass. So if you already have made the connection of how you might end up getting the blade of grass to look like a blade of grass, then maybe you're a step ahead of me. If not, you're going, shoot, how would he do that? Well, instead of using a regular shape like the ellipse, I used the pen tool. And I made sure that that layer was selected, and I drew my little, should I do two? I'll do 3 points. Here is my path. That is now known as mask 1 for the blade of grass layer. If I open up the blade of grass text options, path options, and choose mask 1, there we have it. The text has been assigned to that path. I could reverse it so it's on the other side, but it doesn't really seem quite correct as far as how we would read it. I could turn it perpendicular to the path, but that's also disorienting. And if I force alignment, it'll squeeze it in. But like I did last time, I think I'm just going to have a little change of scale. And now the capital T is sort of missing, and I could do a couple things. I could just move my whole layer up. That's one solution. Or I could shift the margin, if that's a little easier to comprehend. So there's the blade of grass. Now mine was sort of waving in the wind, and all I was doing was, instead of animating anything in the text properties, I was simply animating the mask itself. So mask path, I'm going to keyframe maybe like halfway through, so like 215. I'm going to grab one of these points here, and then you go away. And I'm going to bend this path I kind of like that. Or something like this. So between frame 0 and 215, I should probably arch it a little bit more. There we go. So there's the bend. And then all I did to get back to frame 5 is I just copied and pasted the first keyframe. Copy and paste. So we have some blowing grass. I had 2 of them. Well, that's easy enough. I just duplicated Command D, that layer, moved it over, changed the path so that it wasn't the same. This is okay, whatever. And I lowered the size of the font. And then I'll just need to make a slight adjustment to my margin so that it's kind of coming off the ground again. And there's the animation, but it's still using the same keyframes from the last mask, so I'd probably want to change that too. Probably would want to change that because I see it lifting off the ground. Well, that's not any good. Let's just shorten that back down like so. Maybe I'll even give it a little bit of a bend in the opposite direction, just so they're not, and then I'll have to change that last one. Or I just copy and paste. That's not very good blowing grass right there, is it? No. Geez, Greg. Let's get it blowing like this. There we go. I'm basically just creating a loop. You can get as crazy as you want with that grass, and instead of have 3 keyframes, have 8 or something. So now for the blowing in the wind part. Blowing in the wind, I have to select it, get my pen tool, and then make the path that I want the text to follow. Go open up the text options, path options, choose my mask, and now it's on that path. So then I would simply animate my margin so that it was off screen at the beginning of the comp, and then if you hold down shift, it changes the increments at greater, changes the value at greater increments. There we go. English, me not good at Blowing in the wind. That arc is kind of boring. Maybe I'll come back and I'll change it so that it feels more wind-like. That's kind of cool. Sort of goes over the grass. I like that. And then I had another one, and I just did the same thing. I just duplicated that layer, changed its location. Maybe I'll put this one up higher. And then you just have to play with your locations of the path. They are going at the same time, so I should probably change that in my timeline. I just move my keyframes closer so that they don't appear right away, and then they kind of blow faster, and it's kind of cool. I could also change the scale of that one. And if I did that, I'd have to go back and look at my offsets, because scale changes the way that that text will appear on that path. It occupies more space. So there is the blowing in the wind and those blades of grass. Really rather simple when you think about it, you know. So I want you to practice that, and maybe make up your own little haiku or something, and see if you can just have the words uh, demonstrate or reiterate the little poem. All right, have fun.